The mountains stretched like jagged teeth against the pale horizon, their rocky slopes cloaked in mist and silence. 6 shadows moved carefully across the rugged terrain, every step measured, every glance sharp. This was not their first time slipping into hostile lands, nor would it be their last. John Brooks led them, his face hardened by 12 years of relentless operations, the kind of man who no longer felt fear in the conventional sense, only calculation. The mission was simple on paper: reconnaissance, gather intelligence, avoid direct conflict, exfiltrate unseen. Yet every operator knew that paper plans rarely survive the chaos of reality. John had led countless missions just like this, and experience had taught him that simplicity was often deceptive. What began with silence could easily end in thunder. The team had been dropped under the cover of darkness, their helicopter skimming low across the mountains before disappearing into the night sky. They wore night vision goggles that painted the landscape in eerie shades of green, each man burdened with packs heavy with gear, advanced optics, demolition charges, and weapons suited for quick strikes, not drawn-out battles. The insertion had been flawless, the landing zone secured without a trace left behind. The climb was slow, their boots crunching faintly against loose rock, their bodies pressed low against the earth whenever the wind shifted, as though even the mountains themselves might betray their presence. John signaled with hand gestures, his movements practiced and precise. The team split into positions overlooking a compound below, the target of their mission. At first glance, the compound looked unremarkable, a scattering of structures surrounded by rock walls and crude defenses. But intelligence had flagged it as a staging hub for attacks across the region. It was supposed to be a simple cache, a depot for weapons and supplies. But as the team settled in to observe, John realized this was no simple outpost. Through his optics, he saw not just guards and crates, but organized logistics, trucks rolling in and out, radios buzzing with coded transmissions, even underground entrances masked by camouflage nets. This was not a temporary site. This was an artery feeding enemy operations, a hardened hub with layers of investment and control. For hours, the team worked silently, documenting, recording, mapping every movement. Their lenses captured weapon stockpiles, stacks of ammunition, RPG launchers, and crates that bore foreign markings, evidence that outside hands were involved in fueling the conflict. John knew that what they gathered tonight would shape future operations. Every image, every note, every detail was a piece of a larger puzzle. The night crept toward dawn, the sky lightening with the faintest streaks of gray. When the first crack in her luck appeared, it was small at first, barely noticeable, a footprint pressed into soft soil near a water source. One of his men had stepped carelessly, leaving behind a faint impression. To a regular eye, it would have been nothing, but to the trained gaze of a local tracker, it was a flare screaming danger. The enemy moved fast, faster than John had anticipated. Within minutes, scouts were whispering through radios. Movements rippled across the compound. A search had begun, not a random sweep, but a coordinated net tightening with each passing second. John cursed inwardly as he studied their approach. Over 200 fighters, armed not just with rifles but heavy machine guns and grenade launchers. Disciplined in their patterns, they advanced with precision, not the reckless rush of amateurs. This was methodical, professional, guided by a central command that fed them orders through radios and signals. The SEAL team had the high ground, rocky outcroppings providing cover and clear sight lines. But it was a trap of its own kind. Their position was strong defensively, yet immovable. No room to maneuver, no safe escape routes. John radioed higher command, his voice calm but clipped, reporting the grid coordinates, the enemy's strength, the imminent danger. The response was like ice water. Extraction was at least 45 minutes away, 45 minutes pinned in a noose tightening from every direction. It might as well have been a lifetime. His men were seasoned. They carried 300 rounds each, M4 carbines, a marksman rifle, grenades, and demolition charges. More than enough for reconnaissance. Not enough for a war against 200. They were hunters now, turned into prey, their skill and discipline the only thing holding the tide at bay. Through his scope, Martinez spotted 20 fighters advancing along the northern slope. Robert counted 30 more pushing from the east through the boulder fields. They moved with coordination, using suppressive fire and bounding maneuvers, not the sloppy tactics of guerrilla bands. These were soldiers in all but name. John understood, then, that they had stumbled into something far larger than intelligence had suggested, a hidden army trained and prepared, and here he was with 5 men caught in the center of it. He steadied his breath, weighing his options. His instinct told him the only way out was through the sky, through fire raining down from above. He pressed his comms again, requesting air support, any aircraft, any call sign, anything with the power to shift the balance before the mountains swallowed them whole. The air was growing thick with gunfire now, bullets sparking against stone. The enemy's advance relentless, his men firing carefully, each shot measured, conserving ammunition as though counting every second of their lives. In that chaos, John found himself whispering the same words he had repeated in countless battles. Not prayers, not pleas, but simple truth. Hold the line, stay alive, trust that help is coming. The mountains rumbled with distant echoes, the first promise of salvation on the wind. And though none of them could see it yet, all 6 men raised their eyes for just a moment, searching the skies for the roar that might mean life. For in that hour of desperation, survival hinged not on the ground beneath their boots, but on the wings they could not yet see. The crack of rifle fire echoed through the mountain pass, sharp bursts rattling against stone and slicing the silence into pieces. John Brooks pressed himself deeper into the jagged rocks, his mind cold and clear, though his pulse thundered like a war drum. His men were steady, each one a professional shaped by years of hard missions. But even professionals could feel the weight of 200 trained fighters pressing closer from every direction. The enemy moved with a precision that gnawed at John's instincts. They were not stumbling forward in reckless charges. They were weaving patterns of fire and maneuver, advancing with cover, their radios alive with orders, their formations as disciplined as any modern army. John realized he was not watching insurgents. He was watching soldiers, hardened and dangerous. Robert on the eastern flank called out through comms. 30 hostiles in the boulder fields. Disciplined fire, pushing under cover. Martinez on the northern ridge echoed with his report. 20 more, moving in teams, suppressive fire hammering the rocks. The enemy was closing, drawing the noose tighter. The mountains offered defense, high ground and fields of fire. But the same stone that shielded them was also their prison. There was no path out, only death creeping closer with every advancing step. John's hands tightened on his rifle. His men fought with patience, every round measured, every burst a calculation. They had only what they carried and not a bullet more. Their packs heavy with reconnaissance gear rather than the endless ammunition needed for a siege. John called into his headset again, his voice sharp against the static, requesting air support. Any jet, any bird, any angel in the sky that could pour fire upon the swarming tide. The reply came with a surge of hope. An aircraft inbound, call sign Venom 17, and a 10 Thunderbolt, estimated arrival 5 minutes. The words steadied him. 5 minutes. It sounded both eternal and fleeting. 5 minutes to survive while the mountain howled with enemy gunfire. The A-10 was a beast built for this very moment, a machine forged to protect soldiers pinned against impossible odds. John had seen it before, a flying fortress wrapped around a massive cannon, a guardian angel wearing steel wings, but this time felt different. This time survival itself depended upon its roar. He relayed the message across the team. Prepare to mark targets, hold your ground, conserve what you can until the sky delivers its answer. His men nodded. No words, no questions, only the discipline of warriors who understood that 5 minutes could stretch into eternity when every second was bought with blood and gunpowder. The enemy pressed harder, bullets snapping against stone, grenades bursting in clouds of dust and shrapnel. The team returned fire with precision, dropping fighters one by one. Yet still they came, shadows moving with terrifying coordination, each hostile fallen replaced by another, each gap filled by more bodies advancing with mechanical persistence. The mountains seemed ready to collapse upon them. And then it came, a sound rolling across the sky like thunder tearing the heavens, deep, low, and unshakable. The growl of the A-10 Thunderbolt. John felt his chest tighten with a mix of relief and awe. The beast had arrived. Venom 1-7 announced her presence over comms, calm and steady, requesting target priorities. The voice startled John, clear, professional, and female. In his long career, he had worked with countless pilots, but never had he heard a woman commanding an 8-10 in combat. Surprise flickered for only a second before it was consumed by focus. This voice carried confidence, sharp as steel. She knew exactly what she was about to do. John directed her to the northern and eastern concentrations. Danger close, friendlies pinned on the outcropping. No margin for error, she acknowledged without hesitation, beginning her run. The roar grew louder, the sky splitting as the thunderbolt tore over the ridge at impossibly low altitude. Diving with fearless aggression. Most pilots would have kept distance, chosen safer angles. But Venom 1-7 hurled herself into the storm. The massive cannon unleashed a thunderclap of fire, each burst precise, surgical, obliterating positions with terrifying accuracy. The ground shook beneath the team as streams of fire ripped through enemy lines. Martinez whispered into comms with disbelief. The fighters who had advanced so confidently moments before were shredded into chaos. The sound of the cannon was like rolling storms, every strike a promise of survival. The aircraft pulled into a sharp bank, swinging wide before diving again. Low and fast, using the mountains as cover, attacking from angles the enemy could not anticipate. The second run tore into the eastern flank. Fighters scattered, their coordination shattered under the relentless storm. John's eyes followed every move. This was no ordinary flying. This was not just training or procedure. This was instinct, daring, skill sharpened into something raw and powerful. The pilot wielded the A-10 as if it were an extension of herself, bending it into maneuvers that most would not dare. The mountain battlefield shifted. The tide reversed. The hunters had become the hunted. In less than 10 minutes, the swarming mass of fighters who had threatened to crush 6 men into dust was in retreat, bodies scattered, weapons abandoned, command collapsing under the relentless assault of steel and fire from above. Venom 1-7 returned over comms, calm, composed, reporting minimal activity remaining. Asking if they could move to extraction, John confirmed, his voice steady though his chest still thundered with adrenaline. He requested she remain on station until extraction completed. She agreed without hesitation. The team moved carefully from their rocky prison toward the landing zone, the sky above their guardian circling, ever watchful. The battlefield that had nearly been their grave now lay quiet, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the air. John knew then that survival had come not from luck, but from the skill and ferocity of a pilot who refused to let them fall. And though he had not yet seen her face, he knew that whoever flew Venom 1-7 was not just a pilot, but something far more. The mountain had tried to claim them, and the sky had answered with fire. The battlefield trembled beneath the wrath of the A-10, its roar echoing across the mountains like the growl of some ancient predator. John Brooks and his men hugged the rocky ground as bursts of fire tore through enemy positions, each strike devastating, each pass like a hammer blow falling from the heavens. What stunned John most was not the sheer power of the thunderbolt. He had seen it before. He had lived through missions where its cannon fire split the earth and turned chaos into silence. No, what stunned him was the way this pilot flew. Low, fast, reckless to the untrained, yet precise beyond measure. She dove between ridges, as if the mountains themselves bent aside to let her pass. She fired with a surgeon's hand, even as she moved with the fury of a storm. Most pilots chose altitude, distance, safety. They circled high and slow, careful and deliberate. But Venom 1-7 seemed to thrive where the danger was greatest. Skimming so low John swore he could see the shimmer of her cockpit glass. Her cannon erupted again, streams of fire slamming into clusters of fighters who had thought themselves secure behind rocks and trenches. Their defenses meant nothing before that relentless weapon. Michael on the southern slope reported over comms, on in his tone though steady in his discipline. Enemy forces breaking, scattering, their formation shattered. What had been a coordinated assault now fractured into chaos. Men scrambling, weapons dropped, their advance halted not by numbers but by fear. The A-10 pulled into another brutal turn, wings banking hard, the sound of its engines reverberating through the valley like rolling thunder. Then it dove once more, this time striking from an angle that none expected, eliminating what little resistance remained near the eastern flank. John realized he was watching more than skill. He was watching instinct honed to perfection. A pilot who understood not only the machine she commanded, but the psychology of war itself. Striking where fear would. Spread fastest, breaking the enemies before their bodies fell. The fight dragged on in bursts. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity of fire and steel, yet when the dust finally cleared, the field below lay unrecognizable. The ground scorched, weapons abandoned, fighters retreating in broken lines into the hills, silence creeping back over the valley like the settling of ash after fire. Venom 1-7 returned on comms, calm and steady as though she had not just shifted the course of a battle, reporting minimal enemy movement, confirming that she would hold station until extraction. John gave the order to move, his men careful, their eyes scanning the ruins of what had been moments ago a killing ground. The landing zone was a short hike away, though even those minutes carried tension. The survivors knew that a stray ambush could still emerge from the rocks. Yet above them the A-10 circled, a guardian refusing to leave, her shadow gliding across the terrain like a shield. The extraction helicopters came swift and loud, rotors chopping the air as they descended into the clearing. John led his men aboard, relief washing through his bones not in celebration, but in exhaustion. Survival carried its own weight, and in that moment he understood just how close they had walked the edge. As the bird lifted, he looked down one last time at the valley, the burned scars in the earth where cannon fire had struck, the shattered lines of fighters once so confident now reduced to fragments. It was a graveyard carved by steel and resolve. During the flight back, John's mind refused to settle. He found himself thinking not of the compound, not of the intelligence they had gathered, but of the pilot, the voice that had answered their call with calm assurance. The woman who had flown as though fear were a word she had never learned. Back at base, he requested her details from command, his voice steady but edged with urgency. He wanted to know who Venom 1-7 truly was. The reply came without delay. Captain Emma Carter, call sign Venom, assigned to the 354th Fighter Squadron. The name settled into John's thoughts with weight. Emma Carter, she would be returning to base shortly after them. And though exhaustion pressed against him, he knew he would be waiting. He had seen many pilots save lives, but none had flown like this. None had fought with such ferocity and precision at once. The helicopter touched down at base, the dust of the battlefield still clinging to his gear. John stepped onto the tarmac with his men, alive, whole, though the memory of near death still clung to their shoulders. Minutes later, the familiar thunder returned. Not the roar of combat this time, but the steady hum of landing. The A-10 sweeping down gracefully, wheels kissing the runway as if the storm had chosen to rest. He stood at the edge of the flight line as the aircraft slowed, the canopy lifting, and for the first time he saw her, Emma Carter, not the faceless guardian of the sky, but a young woman in her late 20s, composed, efficient, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. She checked her aircraft, hands practiced, her focus on the machine, her posture betraying no hint of pride or exhaustion, only the discipline of a soldier completing her work. John studied her with a strange dissonance of expectation shattered. The flying he had witnessed belonged to someone reckless, hardened, perhaps scarred by years of fire. Yet before him stood a figure calm, almost understated, a storm wrapped in still waters. He knew then that the story was only beginning. This was not just a pilot. This was a force. And somehow he sensed that their paths were now tied, not by chance, but by the fire of the mountain that had nearly consumed them both. The runway shimmered under the afternoon sun as the A-10 rolled to a halt, its engines winding down with a sound that felt almost reluctant to surrender its fury. John Brooks stood near the flight line, his gear still dusted with the grit of the mountain, his men dismissed to debrief and rest. Yet he remained, waiting, his eyes fixed on the machine that had carved survival out of certain death. The canopy lifted, and Emma Carter emerged, helmet tucked under her arm, her flight suit bearing the marks of sweat and grit. She moved with quiet precision, every step efficient, her gaze sharp yet calm. She did not look like a storm. She looked like discipline embodied. Yet John knew better. He had seen the storm she carried within her. He walked forward, his boots striking the pavement with deliberate weight, his thoughts racing with words unspoken. He had thanked many pilots before, but this felt different. This was not just gratitude. This was recognition of something rare, a skill so sharp it defied expectation, a presence that shifted the course of battle. When their eyes met, there was no ceremony, no grand moment of revelation. Only two soldiers acknowledging one another across the silence of the flight line. John nodded once, a gesture heavy with meaning. Emma returned it, her face calm, almost reserved, as though saving lives in the valley below had been no more extraordinary than flipping a switch. He spoke with the plainness of a man who had spent his life under fire, words direct, steady, offering thanks not with flourish but with weight. He told her that her flying had been exceptional, beyond anything he had witnessed, that she had saved 6 men who otherwise would have been claimed by the rocks and the gunfire. Emma listened with the same composure she had held in the cockpit, her answer modest, almost deflecting. She said it had been her job. The 810 was designed for close support. She had simply used it as it was meant to be used, her voice steady, lacking any hunger for recognition. John realized then that she was not only skilled but uninterested in proving her worth with words. Her proof was in performance, in the scars burned into the earth where her cannon had struck. He asked her how long she had been flying the Thunderbolt. Her answer surprised him. 3 years, trained on T-6S, then T-38S, and finally transitioned into the Warthog. She described her background without embellishment, yet John could not reconcile the limited years of flight time with the brilliance he had seen in the air. Her combat instincts had seemed forged by decades, not mere years. Her philosophy slipped through in fragments. She said she believed in doing everything to the highest ability, especially when lives hung on the edge of her performance. Her tone was calm but firm, as if reminding herself as much as him. John found himself studying not just her words, but her presence. A woman who had been underestimated, doubted, perhaps even dismissed, yet who answered doubt not with arguments, but with action. Rumors had reached his ears, whispers that some had questioned her capability to handle the brutality of the Warthog's missions. Some doubted whether she had the mental and physical edge required. John had seen such prejudice before, men who measured worth by image rather than outcome. He realized now how wrong they had been. Emma had not only handled a mission, she had redefined what it meant to command the sky. In the days that followed, John crossed paths with her again, their duties overlapping, debriefs, mission planning, training exercises. Each time he learned more, Emma was meticulous in preparation, precise in her briefings, unwavering in her execution. She carried herself not with arrogance, but with certainty. Her peers respected her because she gave them no choice. Her performance demanded it. For John, respect turned to something deeper, not personal affection, but professional admiration. He recognized in her the same drive that had carried him through 12 years in the SEALs, a relentless refusal to falter, a hunger not for glory, but for mastery. She had turned every doubt cast upon her into fuel, shaping herself into a weapon as sharp as the aircraft she flew. Other special operations teams began to request her specifically. Whispers spread across units. Rangers, SEALs, and Delta alike, they all spoke of the pilot who flew the Thunderbolt as if it were a fighter, who dove so low and struck so hard that even the most disciplined enemies broke. Emma Carter became a name not whispered in doubt, but spoken with respect. For John and his men, she was more than a call sign. She was proof that survival could come from unexpected places, that sometimes the one underestimated was the one who saved you. On a quiet evening weeks later, John stood outside the hangar, watching as Emma prepared her aircraft for another mission. Her movements efficient, her eyes scanning every line of the machine. He felt a strange sense of calm, as though knowing that if his team ever faced the fire again, she would be there, circling above, ready to strike. It was in that moment he realized the storm he had witnessed in the mountains was not recklessness. It was conviction, The unshakable belief that performance mattered more than perception, that lives were worth every risk, every dive, every thunderous strike of the cannon. Emma Carter had proven herself not with words, not with promises, but with fire, and John Brooks, hardened by a dozen years of war, had never respected anyone more. Time moved swiftly in the months that followed, yet the memory of the mountain never left John Brooks. Whenever he closed his eyes, he still saw the valley, the shadows of 200 fighters pressing in, the hopeless weight of numbers, and then the roar of salvation cutting through the storm. Emma Carter had not only saved his team, she had carved her name into their lives, a name that carried weight wherever it was spoken. John worked with her again and again, missions across different valleys, deserts, and cities. Each time her presence above the battlefield was like a shield, her flying precise, fearless, almost instinctive. The sound of her cannon was no longer just noise to him. It was a promise, a reminder that survival was never far when she held the sky. Her squadron came to rely on her not just for skill, but for her discipline. She was the one who volunteered for the hardest missions, the pilot who stayed longer on station when ground teams needed more time, the one who never let fatigue or doubt show. In briefings, she spoke with clarity, never wasting words, her focus always on the mission, not herself. At first, there had been skepticism, even within her own ranks. Some pilots had doubted whether she could match the brutality of the Warthog's role. Some believed her presence was a test rather than a solution. But doubt does not survive long against performance. Mission after mission, Emma proved not just capable, but exceptional. She flew with such skill that respect was no longer optional. It was demanded by reality. Soon her reputation spread beyond her squadron. SEAL teams, Rangers, and Special Forces units began to request her by name. Commanders noted her ability to change the course of battles. Her style became studied, imitated, her tactics taught to younger pilots. She was more than a warrior now. She was becoming a standard. 6 months later, Emma was promoted, recognized not just for her combat record, but for the effect she had on everyone around her. She was assigned as an instructor, charged with shaping the next generation of A-10 pilots. John attended her ceremony, standing quietly in the crowd as her achievements were read aloud. The words rang with honor, her skill, her discipline, her unwavering commitment to the mission. Yet Emma herself spoke not of triumph, but of responsibility. She said her duty was to ensure others could do the same, that the lives on the ground deserved the best from those in the air. John saw in her a reflection of his own creed. Service not for glory, but for those who stand beside you. She had carried them through fire, and now she would carry others by teaching, by setting a new measure of what it meant to be a pilot. The years carried her forward, her name no longer whispered but spoken with certainty. Emma Carter became a commander, leading squadrons across the world, her tactics written into manuals, her flying used as examples in classrooms, her story told to inspire. But for John, and those 6 men who had been with him on that mountain, her legacy was something simpler. She was the reason they were alive. John rose too, his own career pulling him into greater responsibility. Yet whenever operations aligned, whenever extraction hung in the balance, whenever air support was the difference between survival and loss, he always felt a quiet calm when he heard her call sign on the comms. Venom, circling above. Their bond was forged not in friendship first, but in survival. Respect grown from shared understanding of what it meant to walk the edge. They never needed many words. The battlefield had already said everything. Emma's story spread wider. Soldiers spoke of her not as the pilot who broke expectations, but as the pilot who delivered, who flew into danger when others would hold back, who risked everything to make sure those on the ground could come home. She had proven that strength was not measured by appearance, not by assumption, but by performance, by resolve, by what you do when the world is on fire and lives depend on you. John often reflected on that truth. He remembered how surprised he had been to hear a woman's voice on the radio that day, how doubt had flickered for a moment before being consumed by awe. He realized how close he had been to judging before knowing, and how wrong judgment could be. Emma had taught him without ever trying, that excellence has no boundaries, that the storm can wear any face. Years later, her legend remained, not because she sought it, but because her actions demanded it. The young pilots who studied her tactics, the soldiers who trusted her shadow in the sky, the commanders who shaped plans knowing her squadron was on station, all carried a piece of her legacy. John once stood again in the mountains, another mission, another hostile force pressing close, the tension rising, the air thick with gunfire. And then he heard it, the roar across the sky, the sound of a warthog diving, the call sign venom filling his headset. And though time had passed, though their paths had grown wide, the feeling was the same: relief, trust, and respect. Emma Carter had proven herself long ago. Yet with every mission she proved it again. She was not only a pilot, not only a commander, but a symbol, proof that the underestimated could become unstoppable, that resilience and skill mattered more than doubt. The mountain had nearly claimed them, but had forged something greater, a bond, a legend, a reminder. When lives hung in the balance, when doubt whispered in the shadows, the sky would answer, and sometimes the voice guiding the storm was the one no one expected.